Hey, you guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Pantry Chat Food for Thought. I'm excited to have with me today Patrick Roherman of MT Knives. Patrick is I would say, master knife maker. I'm not sure that he'll use that terminology. He can clarify for us, but he is a fantastic knife maker. He's also an instructor for the School of Traditional Skills. And we're just here to talk about knives a little bit and care of knives and, what kind of knives you should be using in your homestead and kind of anything knives. So this is going to be a fun discussion. And but first, like you guys know, we always like to catch up what's going on the homestead. And so, Patrick, welcome. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on here and look forward to discussing all things sharp with you.
Yeah. And you make all things sharp. That is for sure. Tree topping sharp, as you can explain to us in a little bit. But before we get into talking about knives, we always like to give people a glimpse kind of into the homestead. You're a homesteader as well, and kind of living that life. And so, what's going on for you right now? I know you just bought a piece of property, and I think you guys are kind of working towards transition. So just tell us, like what's happening, and do you have to put all your homesteading activities aside, or are you kind of blending that with getting the property set up? What's going on?
Well, you guys better buckle up for a wild ride. It's been pretty crazy since you guys have left my place. So a few years back, we sold our homestead. It really wasn't we had about 10 acres and cows and goats and chickens and all that jazz. But it wasn't really in a place that we were really happy with. And we were figured we'd sell while the market was good. And then hopefully, the market would adjust and we'd get back in. Well, it's been a wild ride. And fortunately, we've been really blessed, and we picked up a little over 50 acres. And there's no house. And but it's got a spring, and it's got a pond, it's got a creek, and it's just a beautiful piece of property with some timber and some pasture, and it's really everything that we've always wanted on a piece of property. So now all that's lacking is like a whole lot of work. So
Oh yeah.
Fence needs built, infrastructure needs built. It's just a blank canvas. And so I've been trying to balance the knife work and, just basically my business has kind of been put in autopilot. I'm just fulfilling orders. Everything's on back order right now. I'm still trying to get orders out in a timely fashion. So, knives are typically shipping within a week or two. Sometimes, a lot of times within a couple of days, but the property is 2.5 hours from where I live. So I've been camping out there. Built a little tiny house to stay in while I'm working on the property, and we're just trying to get everything going as quick as possible. Unfortunately, help is hard to find, and so a lot of it's just me and my kids.
Yeah,
my boys have been helping. The whole family's been kicking in and doing stuff, and so yeah, we're just super, super busy.
Yep, that is a lot to tackle, and there's a lot of people listening that are probably somewhere on that journey. Either done that and building it up, or in transition, or thinking about doing that soon. And I know we're talking about knives, but I'm curious, for you as a homesteader, what was important to you when you were looking at property, at buying property? So since you just went through this, from your perspective, what were you looking for as you were buying a piece of property to homestead on?
It's really bad, because the older you get and the more the more guidelines you kind of put in place of what you really are looking for. So for us, our previous property was right by a commercial hog operation, and so that was a very eye-opening thing of like, hey, we don't want to be anywhere around a commercial hog operation, turkey barn. A lot of that stuff is prevalent here because we have abundance of water, and we have just it's just a good place. They can tap the aquifers, and then they get free water for their livestock. And but what it leaves you with is a lot of undesirable land. You know, you got the smells from this, you know, commercial operations, you got the traffic, the semi trucks, and we even, unfortunately, we even had a dead pig in our yard one time from, you know, they were hauling diseased pigs or something, and like just trucks overloaded with it, and it ended up in our yard. And it's just not something you want to live by. You know, it's like nobody wants to live by a landfill. So, you know, and then concerns with 4G and satellites and all these kind of things today. We were just really looking for a piece of property that we had a good buffer zone from, you know, commercial farming, spraying. You know, we've had problems in the past with farmers that there's a lot of Mennonite and Amish around. A lot of them lose all their fruit trees because of aerial spraying. The overdrift just kills their fruit trees.
Mm.
And so it's just hard to own enough property to buffer yourself from your neighbors, you know. And unfortunately, some of these farming practices affect everybody around. So we were looking for a lot. And we found a property that ticked off just about everything that we were looking for, save it wasn't really in the exact location that we were, you know, wanting, but it's still in a good location that we want it to be. So we pulled the trigger, made the plunge, and now we're full speed ahead. So
very cool. Sounds like you've got good water, good balance of timber and pasture, and I mean, that's what an amazing foundation.
Oh, this property's got a spring house and just water bubbling out of the ground, and it's crazy. I don't know. There's something about a spring. You know, you can drill a well and have water come out of the ground, but when you have the water just bubbling out of the ground, and you know it's got a old spring house, it's just, I don't know. I feel very blessed having that water source right there. You know, not going to the store and buying some brand that tells you it's natural spring water. Like, yeah. So.
Yeah, we're in the same boat with that. Our water comes out of the ground, and that just, you know, that's not everybody can get that. You're blessed to find it. And that is, it just feels like it's like the gift the land's giving you. You know, it's the similar water had you drilled, but yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. And wished you all the best just on getting that set up. You've got good family to jump in there with you and start tackling that. And I'm gonna give a little pitch and say, hey, you got to go check out the class we did after yours with Nicholas Bertner, where we talked about homestead design and planning and like laying out your whole homestead, and you know, getting those pieces, because you're one of the rare few that are getting to start from scratch, which is pretty cool. You're going to set it up how you want to.
I do say, so there is an infrastructure there's a barn that we're going to be converting into a house and a shop. But yeah, my wife and I, we talked about like design and what we wanted in a house and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, ultimately, you know, I said, I don't really want to get too many ideas set in place until we have the property, because the property really dictates where things are going to be, you know, and so much. And here, if we would have had a plan for a house, you know, our dream house or whatever, but it didn't fit with the property, well, then now you got a problem. So yeah, that I do want to watch that. I haven't watched that class that you guys just put out, but I know of Nicholas, and I'm sure it's excellent. And you know, a lot of the time, unfortunately right now, you know, but there's never too much pre-planning that somebody can do, and forethought put into a project. So yeah, I'll check it out.
Yeah, no, good points about just designing for the land, and like some people have their dream home, but that you're going to go on a property, you want to blend that into the property, not just plop some you know, architectural design on it. And so that's a really good little bit of wisdom there. Well, hey, let's turn toward knives here a little bit. That's the subject at hand, and great to just hear a little bit about what's going on with you and just talk homesteading in general. But tell us, you know, before we get into some of the like details, tell us, you know, kind of how and more so why you got into sharpening knives, why this became your thing. Well,
I was just listening to somebody the other day. saying that, you know, our generation, we've grown up with this doom and gloom just around the corner, you know, Y2K and, you know, all these events that are going to just, you know, society's going to fall apart. And, you know, I got into kind of some survival type training, bushcrafting, camping type things. And one of the most important tools is a knife. You know, like when you get back to the basic core tools that a person needs, a knife is really foundational. You know, you're talking about food procurement, processing food, building things, you know, everything. We use a knife every day, whether that be, you know, a pair of scissors, cutting a piece of paper, or, you know, building a house, cutting, you know, cutting boards, or processing animals, eating our food. You know, a knife, cutting instruments are really down there at the foundational tools that a person needs. And so I wanted to gain the skills to be able to not only just sharpen any knife or tool that I'm using, but to be able to make them from, you know, very minimal. You know, I had the dream of being able to pick up a railroad spike off of the train track and forge it into a tool that was going to be useful to me. And you can even get down to where, like, you make the steel, where you get the get the you know, get your steel and mix it all together and fire it in a forge and make an ingot. The name is slipping my mind, but like they do in Japan. I have yet to do that. Maybe one of these days when I have all this free time, I'll tackle that one. But for now, you know, I started out forging knives, sharpening knives, forging knives, and now doing primarily stock removal. But yeah, knives are an everyday tool that everybody uses. So
Yeah, that's really a great point. They're like one of the most obvious but overlooked tools on the homestead, as far as just us giving some thought to them and how important they are, and, you know, how much we use them, and, you know, and hence how to take care of them, you know, how to deal with them, how to choose them, how to take care of them. And so they're really essential. And man, the way you describe it, it's like it's an extension of our hand, right? Most of us as homesteaders have a knife on our side, in our pocket, or around our neck, the way Patrick does. And, you know, easily accessible, besides knives in the kitchen and knives in the garden, and, you know, chainsaws, and all those are knives, you guys. So as we're talking, you think about a knife like a kitchen knife or a pocket knife, but, you know, an axe is a knife, a chainsaw is a knife, you know, your pruners are a knife, they're a cutting instrument. And so all of this applies to all of that. And we just, there would be no homesteading without that tool. So it almost goes without saying at this point, but you know, just why is it so important to think about this a little bit and have, you know, a sharp knife for any job?
well, anybody that's had to use like old fashioned, you know, saws, planers, or, you know, even, I mean, everybody's used a knife in a kitchen, right? Like, how many times have you been frustrated with your knife being dull? You go to open something and it just takes so much effort. And, you know, quite frankly, most people are using butter knives for every cutting task they need. And they don't understand. And even I, when I got into sharpening, I had no idea what a sharp knife could do, or what it even was. And when you learn what sharp truly is, you're not satisfied with anything else. You know, if you have to apply force to the cut, you're probably not using a sharp knife. There should be minimal force required. So it's going to save you time, it's going to save you energy, and it's just going to give you more satisfaction having a sharp tool. And you're going to have a better overall quality of whatever you're doing, whether that's woodworking or cutting meat, or, you know, whatever it is. Having that tool sharp is critical to just having quality work and, you know, effortless work that's enjoyable. So, you know, you see these sushi chefs, and they're slicing that thin piece of meat, and it just looks so effortless. They would never be working with a dull knife, you know. And, you know, while we might not all be a sushi chef that is trying to cut these super fine cuts of meat, we all will have an advantage having sharp tools in our kitchen. And I'm sure that you've experienced that, we've talked a lot about sharpening. It's just a joy and a pleasure to use a sharp tool.
Yeah, it takes what can be drudgery. It's kind of like, a dull knife is kind of like your garden being overrun with weeds, that just there's stuff in the way. It makes the job hard. But when that knife is sharp and you're breaking down a chicken, it's enjoyable. It's fun, when you're cutting through watermelon, whatever it is you're doing. I've been sitting here thinking about chainsaws just because the other day I was watching my son, you know, we were testing out one of those battery operated chainsaws for light work around here, pruning and different things and making it quick and easy to grab. And he hit something with metal and he just kept on going. And I watched him go from like he was just cruising right through it real easy to all of a sudden he's like working the chainsaw. And I'm like, maybe you want to stop and just go ahead and trade the chain out, because that work doesn't look fun that way, and besides it being inefficient. So yeah, just there's efficiency and making your jobs enjoyable to do.
Yeah, when it comes to chainsaws, like, we don't feel it because the chainsaw's doing all the work, but man, you do feel it. If you're lugging around a heavy chainsaw, you don't want to be carrying that for any longer than you have to. And boy, it's just nice cutting through a piece of wood and these big old curls coming out off the bar, just piling up. I like watching those cutting competitions, and man, they're just flat flying through that log like butter. And none of that's possible with a dull chain. So
no, and you think that power machine, oh well, I'll still just power through it, and we all do it. I do it at times. I'm like out there doing the job, and like I don't want to change the chain out or take the time to sharpen it, and it's really kind of not very smart, because even though it's a chainsaw, you still are having to work your way through instead of like slicing it like butter. And I think we all do that. We do that in the kitchen. We do that even our pocket knives. And it's like, oh, I'll sharpen it later. And you put it away, forget about it. And you come back next time and you're like, oh, I didn't sharpen it. This is a pain. And so it's just so important. And I think there's some good safety things to think about too, with, sharpening a knife, as far as like, that duller instrument can be a lot more dangerous than a sharp knife. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. And real quick, I'll touch on the chainsaw. What people don't realize too with the chainsaw is when you're cutting with a dull chain, you'll actually stretch that chain out. You're causing more wear and tear on the sprocket, on the motor, on all of it. So even though you might not be doing the work, you're destroying that chainsaw. You need it sharp. And just like that, when it comes to safety, when we have a dull knife, we're having to really push hard into cuts. And that's when it gets really dangerous, because what's going to happen is that knife's going to come out of the cut. And if you're pulling to you, or even if you're pushing away from you, injuries are sustained a lot of times from a dull knife and just applying too much pressure. And when that knife goes, you can't just stop it. There's too much kinetic energy there built up, and it's just looking for trouble. Yeah, it's a accident waiting to happen. That's, really too, using the right tool for the right job. I had a friend that had one of my knives, and I said, don't use the knife to cut zip ties or cut plastic and stuff like that, because plastic binds that blade. There's a binding action that happens, and then you have to apply more force to get it through. Well, there's a smart way to do it, and then there's the other way to do it. And a lot of times, say like cutting through a zip tie, it's going to cut through a little bit, but then it's going to bind, and you got to put tremendous force on there to get it to go through. And so, this particular friend was cutting open a plastic package or something and slipped and later knuckle open. She said, she's seen inside the joint. She actually thought she cut her finger off. She didn't, she came close, but it's just dangerous. So if I was going to cut a zip tie or something, a lot of times I'll stick the point in the zip tie and I'll pivot off of whatever it's, which that's creating a lot of pressure on whatever is zip tied. So if if you don't, like, say if it's a cable, like a phone cable or something, and you go to pivot on it, you're crushing whatever that is. So, just using wisdom, using, logic, leverage, mechanical advantage, and sharp tools. There's a lot to working smart with a sharp instrument, and just learning, kind of the physics behind it and how to be careful in what you're doing, realizing when the more force that you're putting on that blade, where the direction that force is, and make sure that there's nothing in the way of it, when it cuts loose, if it does.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, some good safety tips, and keep a sharp knife, but you learn how to use it well instead of all that extra force from a dull knife that ends up getting you hurt. Well, let's dive in a little bit about sharpening knives here. And so if I was looking to get started sharpening my existing knives, what are the first things I need to think about? Like, just from the knife, I've got, 4 knives laid out here in various conditions, maybe some just average kitchen knives, maybe some older ones that I'm really wanting to rehab. But, how do I approach just thinking about sharpening? Can I do this myself? Do I need to do something else to get started? But I'm wanting to, move towards just maintaining my knives better.
Well, there's a really good course that we put together. It kind of talks about all these steps, but the first thing, we're going to do is you got to have the tools to do so, the knowledge on how to do it. But we're going to look at those knives and we're going to inspect them, see what kind of shape they're in, see what kind of damage they have, whether or not the blade is straight. And then you want to make sure you have some good sets of stones. You want to kind of understand what angles are the proper angle for the tool that you're using. And a lot of times that's just matching whatever the factory already has on it. But then the nice thing about sharpening knives yourself is you can cater that to however you use the knife. I recently put a really fine edge on my neck knife. I was trying to achieve some levels of sharpness that I hadn't achieved before. And
that's hard to imagine, Patrick.
Yeah. Well, I got this new tester, and I spent probably 3 hours sharpening the other day trying to get better points. Just trying to achieve new levels of sharpness. But anyways, so then I went out using my knife on the property and stuff, and man, I've chipped up and damaged my blade, because a sharp knife is nice, but you need toughness. You need for every day. So you can cater that edge to however you're going to use the knife. It's fine to have a super thin edge and just super slicey, but you're going to keep that edge for jobs that are not abusive on it, or not like maybe your everyday usage. My neck knife gets used and abused, and sometimes I use it for things that I shouldn't, because I can sharpen it. So it's really not a big deal if I damage the edge. It, just a matter of, taking it back to the stones and fixing it. I do try to keep it fairly sharp because it's what I do for a living. So if I show somebody my knife, I don't want them to be like, oh, this thing looks pathetic. But two, I like to carry 2 as one as none. I like to have multiple knives on me. One's for dirty work and one's for, hey, I need a sharp knife and I need it now. So,
yeah. So on that kind of just thinking about getting started, you talked about inspecting the knife. And so, a bent knife, was one thing you mentioned. So that's something you probably just want to put that knife aside. I mean, I know you could get into straightening, but that's a whole different discussion. So we'll just assume that knife goes to the side. Like, probably you don't want to use that knife without some deeper rehabilitation. Are there any other things you want people to look at, like just deciding, is this knife worth picking up and sharpening and taking care of? Or there's some other things that kind of just say, yeah, this either needs to go to a professional to get rehabbed or just isn't worth using at all, besides a bent knife?
Yeah, if you got one of those knives with a plastic handle and the handle's falling halfway off of it, the quality of the steel is probably junk.
Yeah.
That one you might just set aside. When you're looking at a knife, you want to find a knife that has decent steel. We talk about that in the class about how to identify knives, but a lot of times your main, like old hickory, Kershaw, any of your big, common older knives, they're pretty good steel. You want safety is a factor. You want to make sure that the handle is securely attached. You don't have major chips or pitting. If a knife needs a whole lot of work, I always suggest that people send it off to be sharpened and then use the knife. And the minute it quits cutting, go back to it and try to sharpen it, because it's an achievable goal. You need to set yourself achievable goals that you're not going to get discouraged and give up on sharpening. It takes me a long time to sharpen knives by hand that haven't been sharpened in a really long time or that have a lot of damage. So just learning, practicing on knives that need a little bit of work, not that are just been trashed.
Yeah. What about, before we move on, what about rust? And how much is a knife, if it's rusty, how do you know, is this knife retrievable? You've got a knife that you feels like it's a good fit, you like the blade, but for whatever reason, it got really rusty. Where's any guideline for, like, where do I say this knife's too far gone versus, yeah, I'm going to try to rehabilitate this and take some of the measures to deal with the rust?
Rust doesn't scare me a whole lot, but if it's pitting in the steel and you can rub your fingernail on it. If it's, once you clean up the rust, you can there's lots of different ways to clean up rust. You can use some sort of abrasive, like Barkeeper's Friend, or you can use some sort of rust eraser, or they sell like this Evapor-Rust stuff that I think vinegar takes off rust. But once the rust is cleaned up, you can tell like how far it's eaten into the steel. And if it's eaten a lot, like if you look down that edge and it's all wavy and have divots out of it where the rust has eaten that steel away, that knife can be repaired, but it's probably best to just find a different knife and work with it. But if it's just surface rust that hasn't eaten down into the steel a whole lot, not a big deal.
Yeah, cool. It's good. Those are good tips. So let's talk about sharpening methods. There's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different tools for sharpening a knife, from water stones to wet stones to electric sharpeners to a lot of different handheld gizmos that have got diamond sharpeners, whatnot, all the way up to, pretty fancy, powered sharpeners. Like there's electric ones, like the kitchen chefs or whatever they are, kind of kitchen top ones. And then there's ones that somebody that sharpens a lot might use. You've got one with a motor that takes a lot of metal off fast, but you got to really know how to use it well. Where do you recommend people to start? Let's just go there. Where should people start if they're going to start learning to sharpen?
Well, with building anything, we got to start with the foundation, and the foundation for sharpening is learning how to sharpen by hand. A motorcycle will get you there faster, but you should probably hop on a bicycle first. And, when you fall off a bicycle, it's not near as bad as falling off a motorcycle at 60 mile an hour. So, learning how to freehand sharpen, learning, how to hold the right angles and all that kind of stuff is going to benefit you. Learning how to raise the burr, all that's going to help you utilize any other jig or machine. It's just going to make you more efficient. So I always recommend people learn how to hand sharpen first and go from there. Any type of machine or gadget is going to have limitations. And really, if you don't have the knowledge of what you're looking for and how to achieve it, then those machines can kind of help you, but only to some extent, right? We can throw bumper rails in the bowling alley, but it's not helping kids hit strikes all the time, right? It's keeping the ball traveling in the right direction, but it's not making you a good bowler. So, same with these jigs and stuff. You learn how to sharpen by hand, become proficient at it, and then you can step up to the machines and learn how to use them effectively. Really, you only want to remove enough steel to get that edge on the knife. So, a lot of beginner people using machines, they just destroy knives. They gouge them. They just take way too much steel off. They miss areas of the blade. So just learn the foundations.
I like the analogy of riding the bike, and learn to ride a bike before you get on the motorcycle. And I think that for the average user, the bike being like the hand sharpening is going to suffice. There's a lot of people just don't ever even need to get on that motorcycle, right? Unless you're really doing a high volume or something after you've kind of mastered the craft. Most people, I think, can stick with hand if they're maintaining their knives. What you teach and what I learned from you is you can tune that knife up pretty quick. If you need to rehab it, you can take a little bit of time, but if you're taking care of it after you've rehabbed it, it really doesn't take that much time. So the investment in machinery isn't really even needed. And I would say, like, and just confirm this or not, for the average homesteader, kitchen gardener, whatever, they're going to be able to stick with a hand method if they learn it well and be pretty efficient. Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, there's an economy of scale, and anytime you use a machine and there's jigs involved, there's time setting it up, unless you have a dedicated place for that machine. And even then, I mean, if you got to take your knives to the machine and do it versus having a stone that you can take with you wherever you're working and be able to just, quickly touch up your edge. 9 times out of 10, like, I have machines at my disposal, but a lot of times I'll go to my stones to touch up my knife because it's just faster,
Yeah.
I don't have to set up a jig or do any of that kind of stuff. And I mean, I know you can use a machine freehand as well. But the stones, if you're staying on top of your knife the way that you should, your knife shouldn't need to go to a machine most of the time. The old timers used to say you sharpen a knife once and you strop it, 50 times or whatever. So a lot of times people would sharpen knives and then just strop them and, maintain that edge. You can strop all you want. It's not going to take care of a chip, so, or, real bad blade damage. So I don't strop as much as some people do. It's got a time and a place, but that's stuff that we cover in the class.
So cool. Honing down on so just like, let's stay away from the machines. We're hand sharpening. You're talking a lot about stones. What kind of stones do you recommend? Where's the best place to start, or just to even exist, if you're gonna hand sharpen with those stones?
So you got diamond stones, you got oil stones, you got wet water stones. There's so many different types of stones. I really recommend somebody get a good medium grit stone, like the King 1000. It's a great starting place, and you could actually do everything with just that one stone. I do recommend that somebody picks up, a finer stone like a King 6000. With those stones, they served me well for many years. Now I've gotten into, all different kinds of diamond stones, natural stones, water stones. I don't do a whole lot with oil stones, but that is a, it's kind of like, it's anything, right? So you can drink Folgers coffee, or you can get into espresso and custom roasted and all these grinders. And, it's like, where do you stop? So for me, sharpening is a passion. It's something that I find enjoyment in, and I've tried every, I'm still trying new stones and trying, different things. And, that's, if you get into sharpening and you don't advance past just the, King 1000 grit stone and 6000 grit stone, fine, great. But it can be one of those deals where you get into it and you just want to, you want to go down that trail of experimenting with different stones and trying different things. And yeah, I've sunk a lot of money on different stones.
Yeah.
I know what to buy and what not to buy. So,
well, that's good. And that's why we're enjoying getting to talk to you. And so I think, with that, all that experience, I think what you're saying in there is like that King stone is a water stone. And so, a average costing water stone, I think if I'm understanding you right, is where you would kind of send people to.
Yeah.
And that's going to suffice again for most people for their knife sharpening, career to be proficient on the homestead, somewhere right in there. Is that right?
Yeah, and the thing to keep in mind is it's skills, not tools. Like, it's the skill of sharpening. Like, everybody they think that they need this different tool or different stone to be successful, but I can do some pretty crazy, amazing stuff with just a King 1000 grit water stone. So, you can't necessarily get the same results from a brick, which you can sharpen a knife on a brick. You're not going to get the same results on a brick. However, like where it really comes down to it, it is a skill. And, we see this with like painting, right? You can give somebody that knows how to paint some mud and a white, wall, and they're going to create some masterpiece. And you can give me, the most elaborate paint setup in the world, and you might see some better work from a 5-year-old. So
you and me both, brother. That's great. All right. Well, there you go, you guys. Be thinking about those water stones, simple tools, and learning the skill. I love that, Patrick. Learning the skill, and then you really have a lot of choices. So, talking about skill a little bit. Obviously, we can't dive into a lot of details here. And Patrick's got resources. We've got resources with Patrick over the School of Traditional Skills. But let's just talk about one thing that a lot of people do, discuss and look at with sharpening stones or sharpening knives, and that is the correct way and the correct direction. And what I'm honing down is pushing or pulling or both. What's the right action in your opinion if you're building that skill to use?
Potatoes, potato. I always say, the proof is in the pudding. I primarily do edge trailing strokes, meaning once I've established an edge and I'm sharp, now I'm just honing the blade. I'm treating the blade like I would on a leather strop. And, when it comes to leather, you can't go the other way, right? If you try to take a knife on a strop and slice into it, you're going to cut that strop in two. So, once you've established an edge, I do edge trailing strokes on all my stones. And I think some of the argument is, well, it creates a bigger burr and you don't want a burr and, whatever. It's like, I don't care. If you want to do edge leading strokes on your stones, you go right ahead. And there are people that get knives super sharp doing that. On some of these water stones that I use, they're super soft and just like a strop. If you're cutting into the stone, you're going to nick that stone. You're going to gouge that stone. A lot of the way I learned was a kind of traditional Japanese style sharpening, and they do edge trailing, and it works great. So, you experiment with it. If you want to do edge leading strokes, you go right ahead. I can say in all my years of sharpening, I've found the best results with edge trailing strokes. If there's something on the stone, you're going to kind of glide over it, as versus, cutting into the stone, you're ramming that edge into whatever, is on that stone. So that's it's something that people just like to debate because some people just like to argue. So,
yeah, well, and everybody's got their method, and I know that yours works. Patrick has what he calls beyond razor sharp, and his knives, when he takes them all the way, are beyond razor sharp, and a term called tree topping. Most of us think about a sharp knife if we can run that blade down our arm a little bit, right, and the hairs pop off, that knife is sharp. But Patrick's knives, you can run them across your hairs without having the resistance of the skin at the base of that hair, and that's the barometer for sharp. And tree topping, I couldn't figure out what you were talking about when I first heard that term, but that's how sharp you guys can get a knife if you listen to Patrick's wisdom here and dig into him a little bit more. And Patrick, where can people find you? to come learn more about you, what you're doing? Where do you want to send people?
I've gone off grid. You can't find me anymore. No, you can go to mtknives.net. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and that's about YouTube. The best way to get a hold of me is to email me, patrick@mtknives.net. If I don't, sometimes I'll miss email, so shoot it again if you don't get a response within, a week. I try to respond to emails faster than that, but the truth of the matter is sometimes I don't. I got 10 kids, got a big farm now, and a business that keeps me busy. So I'll do my best.
For living. That's good living.
So, yep, that's the best way to get a hold of me. And if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to help out however I can.
Right on. Well, thanks, Patrick. Thanks, you guys, all for showing up today and watching or listening wherever you're at. And I hope this was helpful. Go dig some of those knives out of the drawer and tune them up and find out what it's like to use a properly sharp knife and what a joy it is. So thanks again, Patrick. It's been great hanging with you, and everybody else, I will see you soon. Take care.